Good evening, everyone. I'm Joan Lawson. We have a treat tonight. Resident Gordon Orians, Professor Emeritus of Biology, where he taught at the University of Washington since 1960, will not be giving us a lecture from his classes. But he's put together a new topic, the evolution of deceit. It may be that word, evolution, is the reason that he asked the secular humanists to co-sponsor with Let's Talk Science. Gordon is an ornithologist, ecologist, writer of many articles and books, still travels to keep enriching his knowledge. And how many of you have seen him in other lectures here? Great. Years ago in the 70s, he was speaker at the Elliott Institute, a Unitarian conference at Seebeck Conference Center on Hood Canal. That's where I first knew him and his family, so you can imagine my delight when he moved into Horizon House. Nick Linsau is staff person with us to handle any problems with technology. He's in the back. We appreciate you're here, Nick. Will you wave? Andy Gordon and Let's Talk Science Committee are here, as are the members of the Secular Humanist Steering Committee. Let's have both groups stand and be appreciated. Thank you. Gordon will speak for about half hour, and then he'll take questions or comments. Gordon.
After that wonderful introduction, I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say. I'm here to talk about the evolution of deceit. Why am I showing you a picture of an orchid? This is the Ophrys. It's an orchid that is found in Mediterranean Europe, and it has an interesting story to tell. But if you want to find out why I'm starting with this, you'll just have to hang around for a bit. Now, my goal, I'm not a show and tell guy, and you've all seen all sorts of pictures of things that are imitating this and that and pretending to be something else. And I'm not going to try to show you a lot of stuff. My goal in this talk, or chat as it were, is to give you a deeper understanding of what's behind the evolution of these things, what occurs, what doesn't occur, why there would be something like this orchid involved at all. And so I hope you'll come away with a better understanding of why we see the things that we see and why we don't see the things that we don't see. To do this, we'll need just a little bit of primer on evolution. I need to convert you from evolution believers to evolution comprehenders, okay? Because I assume that, what's been interesting, I'm an evolutionary biologist, and for most of my career, more than half of the people of the United States didn't believe in evolution. The great news is it just passed to 51%. Which I don't take great pleasure in it, but at least we're moving in the right direction. But even the people that do believe, there's a lot of misunderstanding. And what evolution really is, the way to think about it that may help, imagine we have a population and we're going to go and do a census and to get the frequency of all the genes in that population. And then we say, go and reproduce. And then the generation later, we count the genes again. Some have increased in percentage-wise, and some have decreased. And that is natural selection. So it's a statistical outcome that some increase. And if there's increases, there has to be decreases, but because proportions add up to 100%, right? And so we can learn a lot by how those changes. Now, evolution does not have any foresight. We talk about it being random, but it's not really random because that's why everybody is working hard to figure out what could be the next flu vaccine or the next thing against COVID, because mutations are occurring and we learned something about what they were doing. But what is really random is with respect to need. If we take the giraffe, as we know, there's been selection for longer necks in giraffes, and in any generation, mutations were no more likely to have effects of increasing the length as to decreasing it. So it's random with respect to need, but other things are going on. So there's a couple other things you need to understand about evolution. It doesn't take great big effects. And what we're looking at, some of the things I'll talk about in this particular orchid, is the result of very long periods of evolution. And very slight differences can make a big advantage. A 5% advantage can be big and lead to, as long as it's consistent, can lead to total. So what we see is in a particular moment in time of stuff that's been evolving along, and that's not how it started out in most cases. And don't try to think of it as that all of a sudden it blossoms like this. But the good news is that very, very slight differences, if they're consistently favored, can result in big changes over time. So what I want to look into now with you and help explain is why I hope in a while you will understand why I picked an orchid. One of the reasons I picked an orchid is that a lot of people think there's deceit, it has to be conscious and aware. And you're not going to make that mistake with the orchid, are you? The point is that most of this, it doesn't demand that there's be any conscious awareness of what's going on. It doesn't preclude it, but as you'll see, mostly what I talk about, and even when we talk about how it applies to human beings, there's a lot that's not really a case that somebody knows what they're doing. And a lot of what we do then, we fabricate an answer afterwards because we're embarrassed because we didn't know why we did it. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about then, and let me explain a little bit about this orchid. It's the genus Ophrys, and the first clue to what I'm talking about is that it's commonly known as the bee orchid. So what do you see here? This orchid, well, orchids live on very, very poor soils or poor environments, like on the branches of trees. And orchids may live for years and years before they produce a flower. And I've been in the field with orchid watchers in Central America, and they've got them all labeled up on the branches of the trees, waiting for them to flower so they can tell what they are. And so orchids are going to flower very, very infrequently. And that's the reason why orchids are different from all other flowering plants. They make flowers that last. That's why you can use it as a corsage. You don't want this as a corsage, I don't think, but they last. No other plants produce flowers that last like that because it's a long time. It's evolved to put a lot of energy into making sturdy flowers because it could be a long, long time before there's anybody to be pollinating with you. So orchids are really unusual. There's no accident that's why we're using for corsage. But this another thing that the orchids do then, because and they've done something which no other plants do, that they gather all the pollen into one little structure called a pollinium. And when that's picked up by a pollinator, that whole thing goes. And it's interesting because of the convoluted structure of orchids. You can have, I've seen bee orchids, orchid bees with pollinia from a bunch of different orchids on the back, in different places. And the whole idea of all this complicated structure, I hope when it gets to the next orchid of the same species, that's the one that'll come off, not the wrong one. And this is very, very amazing. And the fact that it works at all, I'm really astounded. But it does, because orchids are one of the most species, or more than 20,000 species of orchids. It's one of the most species-rich plants groups on Earth. and it works. Okay, so what's this particular orchid? The way it works, there are bees that hatch out there, and the males are very anxious to find females, and this orchid looks a lot like a female bee. All right, it's got an iridescence, and what you can't see, but it was also true, it smells like a female bee. Okay, and so what happens? The male goes in and gloms onto it and tries to copulate with it, and he picks up a polinium. And in order for this to work, he has to go to another orchid of the same species, so he can't learn from that one experience not to go, otherwise the thing doesn't work, right? So he's got to not be very smart about this. So he's got to, for this to work, he's got to get to another orchid of the same species before the polinium gets knocked off on the wrong thing. So why does this work? Why doesn't he figure it out? Well, he's got a small brain, but it's amazing what bees do with small brains. So the key to this is there are lots of bees and very few orchids. So it's very rare that you make this mistake. And the mistake is not lethal. He can hop off and have another one. It might even be pleasurable for all we know. But there is no selection then to make this discrimination, okay? Because overwhelmingly, what you go to something like this, it's going to be a female bee. It's not going to be an impositor. And so there's no selection to make this change because, and again, natural selection will produce responses to something like this only when there's reason. And adaptations cost something. Then like there's no free lunch, there's no free discrimination. Discrimination takes power of neurons and it's competing with other things. And if you put more energy into this, you got to take it away from something else. So there's economy of this. So this persists because orchids are rare and bees are common. And so it's very rare to make this mistake. And it's this mistake made, and it's not lethal. The guy gets, well, in fact, it has to be not lethal because if it killed him, the whole thing wouldn't work. And this is a very common thing that will be a theme I'll talk about, is that a lot of this works only if the impositor, or the one who's doing the deceiving, is very rare. So there are lots of bees out there, there are very few orchids. And this is very common. You take these angler fish that you see in the deep sea, and they will dangle a little thing out there that looks like a little crustacean or something out there. And fish comes up to get it, and it gulps it, okay? Well, the vast majority of those things out there that look like that are real plankton, right? It's very, very rare that it's dangled by a fish. And so there is, and it's usually good to respond to that thing because that's food, and if you ignore that, it's not so good. So that evolves and continues because it is so rare that happens, that it's a mistake that most of the fishes will never make. And those that make it, it's lethal, but it's rare enough that it doesn't cause the evolution of responses to it. And this is a very important message I want to say, is that as we look at a lot of these adaptations, we will find that they are rare, and there's a good reason that they're not more common. So that said, I'd like to turn to some examples while you savor. This orchid is really quite remarkable what it carries out, okay? Even though you don't want it as corsage, it's really quite and there are others in the genus across the Middle East that also do the same thing. But orchids are rare, bees are common. Darwin did not, in The Origin of Species, was a misleading book because it wasn't about the origin of species. And it wasn't about, and he didn't have a single example yet of natural selection because there were none yet. And he's proposing a mechanism, and it's going to be the future that provides the evidence. And the first best evidence of natural selection in operation came from butterflies. And the butterflies of two groups. And one are a palatable butterfly mimicking a toxic one. Okay? And the most famous one in North America is the monarch butterfly, which is very toxic because it eats milk. The larvae eat milkweed, all that milky stuff, that's toxic. The larvae pick it up, they're toxic, and then it's passed on. So the adult butterflies are toxic from the diet, and they're picking it up. And they're using it as a defense because they're able to detoxify it so it doesn't poison them. But the monarch has a mimic called the viceroy. And it looks pretty good like a monarch. But all of you have probably seen or know about monarchs, right? Have you ever heard about a viceroy? How many of you have? Okay, a couple. Viceroys are rare, and there's a very good reason. It won't work, because if the viceroy were more common, that would mean, because back up a little bit, birds, which are going to be the main actors in a lot of this, birds have to learn it's edible. They're not born with inborn, because they eat a lot of different things and you don't know what they're going to find where they're born. So birds have to learn. And so they try things out. And so they try out a monarch caterpillar. And this has been done with blue jays. They gobble it up, and within 15 minutes they're vomiting. And they will never touch another one again. So, but they have to learn. So if there's out there, and what is the first thing that the jay encounters is a monarch. It rejects that. And then if the next thing it encounters is a viceroy, it's likely to not try it either. That's the whole idea. But if the first thing it comes on is a viceroy, then it will learn, okay, that stuff is good, and then it's going to go on and try to, it will start going after monarchs. So in order for the viceroy not to, to overtake, and the monarch doesn't work away from it because there's a penalty, it's because the viceroy is very rare relative to the monarch. And so a single death is a bigger proportion of the population. It'll move it. So the viceroy can move pretty fast. The monarch is not under pressure to move away from it because it's happened so rarely. So again, the secret is, in order to be an effective mimic in these systems, you have to be rare. Which is why a lot of these things that we're finding out, all these cutesy things, you realize, the reason we're just finding out about them, they're rare. They don't happen very often. But there's another bit of mimicry involved in butterflies, and that's also was discovered fairly soon. And this is the convergence to look alike of butterflies, all of which are toxic. That's a different kind of mimicry. And that everybody has an advantage of being confused with somebody else, okay? And so there's no losers. Everybody wins until you get big bunches of things that look alike. And Miller, the German entomologist who found us, he had a big collection of butterflies, and they all looked alike. And he looked more closely. Well, I got a whole bunch of different species here, and a couple of them even in different families. What's going on? And this is a convergence, and there's no losers here. Everybody wins. Why is this not more common? It takes a lot of species. You got to have a lot of richness thing. And in the temperate zone, we don't have enough richness of things to make it work. And so the only a few places where these are found in really species-rich tropics. And it won't be that widespread because you take a lot of things to do this. So here's a basic rule. mimicry, especially when it's successful, is not the ticket to abundance. It's the ticket that you can still get along when you're rare. And that's why we keep discovering these things, because why didn't you discover them before? Because they're rare. So this is the first lesson that I think is really important. To understand that abundance or persistence is a very important thing, and these mutations that don't occur in a vacuum, and somebody may be responding. So a very important thing about it is there somebody that's hurt and is going to be affected by this? And the answer is sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. And a good case where there isn't is particularly insects that mimic different parts of plants. That they look like a little dead branch. They look like a little. They look like a dead leaf. There's a whole bunch of things where insects mimic different parts of plants, and some of them are pretty good. But why does this work? Was the predator that's going to be birds there that's not after the plants. The plant is just a substratum for this, but the insects are the ones that are eating the plants, and the birds are coming after them. So is there likely to be an evolutionary response on the part of plants? No, probably not, because what's really going to determine the plants are the herbivores that are coming and gobble everything up, and they're probably going to take the mimicking insects along with them, so that the plants simply aren't going to be affected by this. So you can do all this marvelous mimicry of different parts of the plants, dead leaves, and so, because there simply isn't going to be any evolutionary response on the part of plants. So one of the things you have to ask, who's hurt? And are they likely to evolve something in response to being hurt? And the answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. And it is plants where the answer is almost certainly no. So that can allow marvelous mimicry of all sorts of pieces the insects gain, and the plant is just a substratum of the birds and the insects doing something, and the plant isn't going to change its form because somebody's imitating a dead branch. Those are not going to be evolutionarily significant on the part of plants. So you have, in looking at or thinking about any form of mimicry, one of the things you have to ask, who's hurt, and is there likely to be an evolutionary response on the part of who's hurt? And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. So this provides some evidence, and I could go on and on and on, but basically, if you look at mimicries, and they're abundant, they're gee whiz all over the place, you will be surprised if they aren't rare, because this doesn't work. If the viceroy were more common than the monarch would evolve faster and couldn't catch up. So the relative abundance is extremely important, and it works if you're rare. So it's a ticket to being able to survive when rare, but it's not a road to abundance. So this is a very important part of deceit, of mimicry, is pretending you are somebody that you're not. And again, it doesn't have to be conscious. This orchid I'm convinced, has no idea what it's doing. It's a pretty good mimic. Good enough that the males keep trying to copulate with them. And it seems to be stable, and there's a number of species, and it's gone on for a long time. Now, one other thing that I need to mention about this orchid, and I did mention it briefly, I want to come back to it, and that is it has the right odor, too. There's odor mimicry. And there's probably a lot of odor mimicry, but we don't know what it is because we can't detect it. we wouldn't know that that smells like a bee if we didn't know about the mimicry, and then you learn it up and the chemist will tell us. So, so that mimicry, so there's got to be an enormous amount of odor mimicry, and we just don't know about it. And I'll give you one example that we do know about it, that we found out because it's so bizarre. There are a number of species of butterflies that parasitize bees. Yes. And what they do, they'll be close to a bee colony, and they'll lay the eggs on some plants there, and the larvae will feed a little bit and then drop to the ground. And the ants pick it up and carry it into the hive. Well, it's got to smell right. So but the ants make only one discrimination. Are you in the in-group or the out-group? Do you smell like the colony or do you not? So they take it in, and then depending on the species, once in there, they either get fed by the bees to like pupate, or they turn cannibalistic and start eating the bees, the larvae of the bees. And some of them do that and some of them don't. And so this has got to be entirely odor detection's chemical. We only know about it because we found out that this bizarre things, what these bees do, and these butterflies, they parasitize bees. But we wouldn't have found it out. And there's just got to be tons and tons of stuff that we don't know because that's not our sensory mode, and we just maybe the chemists will figure this out, but this is a big arena in which we're really quite ignorant. But I want to turn to something, we could go on because nature is full of wonderful stuff that are interesting, and one of the reasons we find them interesting is they're all rare, aren't they? Okay, but let's talk to something different where you're not pretending to be a member of another species. We're talking about you are pretending to be better than you are. The deceit is, look, hey, I'm the female you want to mate with. You want to have me sire your babies, or if you get in a fight with me for dominance, I'm going to beat you up, and you can tell I'm okay. Well, this is something where the deceit is intraspecific, and it relates to dominance and access to reproduction. And let me just deal a little bit with those. One, to deal with first with mammals. And as we know, mammals have almost no biparental care because of the nutrition which mammals evolved is called milk. And male mammals don't make milk. We've got some things up here, and they don't seem to be worth anything, and they definitely don't make any milk. So parental care in mammals is almost uniformly, entirely by the female. So when we're looking at mating and what's going on, when females are then looking for males, they're looking for genes only. And of course, genes are that's the currency of evolution. So the female isn't going to get anything else from the male but a bunch of genes. So how do you decide if this guy has got really good genes? Or did he just rent the car and a special suit just for the night, and he doesn't really own them? And how do you know? So what is involved with this is the evolution of really good crap detectors. How do you find out? And so what do you do? One of the ways that females choose is let the males duke it out and pick the winner. Okay, and that's a pretty good way to do it. Let that decide. And so, but there's also one of the basic rules of combat is don't get into a fight you're likely to lose. And so there's a lot of assessment when two guys are facing off, who's going to win. And so what you see are and you see, if you go to the movies, they all show you the bashing and all this wonderful stuff because that makes great videos. when they get together and assess and go apart, nothing happens. Nobody wants to see that. Okay, so you get a very biased view in what you see. So what you see is the evolution of stuff that you can't cheat on. And so let's take two red deer, or elk, which is the U.S. North American form of the same thing. They get together and they roar. And they roar and they roar and they roar. Well, you can't cheat on that. The volume of your chest and stuff determines how much roar you make, and your strength and vigor depends how long you can go at it. And so most of these things you have roaring, and it's hard to cheat on. You can't pretend to have a bigger lung capacity than you do because it shows up, okay? And it goes, and finally, in most of these cases, one backs off. And so what you have is these are reliable signals that they can't be cheated on, because otherwise nobody pays any attention. So these attempts to pretend or look as though you're stronger, more valuable than you really are, really end up being curtailed by the fact that you evolve to reliable signals. And when we look at then to birds, which quite different, where the vast majority of birds are monogamous and have biparental care, because other than laying eggs, male birds can do anything the female birds do, and most of them do. And so you have selection maybe. So what you have, a common thing in bird courtship is courtship feeding. I'm going to be a good guy. If you have your eggs, I'm going to help you feed your baby. So that's a signal. But what interesting things with birds, so mostly have feather modest stuff and a little bit of singing and that sort of stuff, but it doesn't get to an extreme. But where it really gets interesting in birds is those species where it's not by parental care, where it's only the female that's going to take care of everything, and the males are, again, like in mammals, going to provide only genes. So what's the female looking at? Genes. And what sort of birds do we find where that's the case? And it's overwhelmingly fruit-eating birds, where the males can gather in a lot of fruit. And because one of the ways females can assess these leks where all the males get together is make repeated visits. Can the guy last there? When you see pictures of say, sage-grouse leks where the males are doing this and the females are wandering through and it looks as though they're not paying any attention, they are. And because it ends up, one of the males will get about 80% or 90% of the copulations, but it looks as though they're not paying any attention, but they are. They're looking how well you perform the dance, and they're looking, are you able to sustain it? So repeated visits, look like nothing's going on, and the females could, they're really looking and checking it out, because that's one of the ways you find out. But another is to force the males into very elaborate and detailed and amazing things. And you've probably all seen, how many of you seen pictures of the birds of prey doing something like this? Very few of you have. You should, rather the birds of paradise, excuse me, I misspoke. The birds of paradise, yeah, I get some more hand. The birds of paradise, these are, it really goes to an extreme in New Guinea. And New Guinea is interesting because there are no fruit-eating mammals in the canopy. There are no monkeys or apes in New Guinea. The birds have it all. So all of the fruits up there in the canopy. There's one marsupial gets up there, a tree kangaroo, and it eats leaves. And if you watch the tree kangaroos, you wonder, you don't really belong up there, do you? They're really awkward compared to a monkey or an ape. So New Guinea has no mammals like, and that's why the big worry is if monkeys got into New Guinea, they'd wipe out so much stuff. They'd cause so much devastation because there's nothing there. So the uh, bowerbirds have, and displaying have, the males have the whole thing up there. So they're able to get into these display grounds, and they can stay there, and they can be there for months on end. And one of the ways that females can just check on how good they are is make repeated visit. Is this guy still there, or has he had to leave because he couldn't quite take it? But also, this takes the form of developing, pushing to very, very elaborate dancing. And the more elaborate the dance, and you've seen pictures that amazing things that the males go through. And the females, again, aren't going to get anything but genes from these guys. The females are going to lay the eggs and raise the babies all by themselves. And so again, we're in a situation where they derive it to amazing levels of, because that's the last you're going to copulate with this guy, and that's the last you're going to get. You're not going to see him again, and he's not going to do anything else for you. So the strong selection, and it can be driven so far in New Guinea as compared to the birds of paradise. They're more elaborate than anywhere else, again, because there's no canopy mammals, and there are very few carnivorous things on the ground either, so you can go around it. So it's pretty free, the birds got it, and you can force it, and this can drive it into a very elaborate set of things as you get in there. But there's very weak counter selection. So how far you can drive something like this is, are males likely to suffer a lot from being pushed this far, and what will the counter selection be? And in the case of many cases on the mainland where we have some of this, we know that there's increased mortality of the males when they're doing this. And males that are just having, like robins when they're having a territory and advertising, and are singing up in an exposed location. We can tell with the robins around here when the male gets a female, because the rate of singing drops by about 80 or 90%. So we know that it's dangerous to be up there singing, because not only the females can hear you, but all the predators can hear you too. You can't control who's getting the message. And so we know that this can be very dangerous. And so this counter selection that New Guinea has pushed this so far because there's very, very weak counter selection. There's no competition for fruit, and there's very few terrestrial other predators that the birds really have to work out on. So the situation where it's intraspecific, as I've just described, is a case where the evolutionary response is to favor and work toward reliable signals that can't be cheated on. You can force these guys to do and there's no way of cheating all that roaring, or there's no way of cheating this very elaborate dance that you can do and perform it and make them perform it over and over again. You can't cheat on that. So evolution has brought things to favoring very reliable signals. And that's what constrains the evolution of fake news, as it were. And I'm trying to convince you that I'm better than I really am in some dimension. And it doesn't go very far because it's easy. If it's a thing that doesn't cost anything, nobody will pay any attention. Females will evolve not to pay any attention to that. So when this intraspecific attempt to deceive has very strict limits, because there's counter selection, and the females learn, and the males fighting together one another, that there are very reliable signals that you can't cheat upon. So very different things happen in that sort of thing than happened in the, and it's got different outcomes than in the evolution where it's intraspecific and something other species are involved. So I've tried to present to you a coherent view of how deceit can evolve and renew. But now Q&A, will offer a way to tell if I've also deceived you.
We think we've just heard from Gordon Orians, and perhaps we have.
That's what I
questions
think.
do people have? Yeah.
Gordon, you said that so rarity is the key to successful deceit, as in the case of the viceroy butterfly. Is that because the viceroy is intrinsically rare, that is to say it doesn't multiply all that well? Or is there something about its deceit that makes it rare?
Well, since it works and you can get good mimicry only when the mimic is rare, that leaves then, why is the viceroy not more common? And we don't know, but maybe it may be the food that it eats or whatever. Well, there'll be some combination of reasons, but what it involves is that whatever is limiting the population of the mimic, it never can never get common enough. And those that didn't have that, we don't see the mimicry because the thing being mimicked evolved away from it, so you don't see it. So it leaves unknown, and I don't happen to know, and I don't know if anybody knows why the viceroy is not more common. But there can be a whole bunch of reasons that for other species being limited by something else. And so it's probably highly varied and different from species to species. But what limits you is not how good you are as a mimic.
Other questions? Yes.
Oops, easy, Connie.
I'm intrigued by the absence of monkeys in New Guinea. Does that have to do with the Wallace line? The Wallace
why
line.
the birds of paradise?
Yeah, the absence of monkeys in New Guinea,
Yeah.
whereas they're rampant on the mainland.
Well, if we look at, and Connie refers to Wallace's line, which is very important, and I'll explain what that is. The other person who discovered natural selection and made it, I think, was Alfred Russel Wallace. And he was working as a collector, and he made a living by collecting stuff, specimens of a lot of stuff, and sending them back to England, and he sold them. And Wallace noticed some very interesting things. That he worked all over Indonesia, and he stand at the island of Bali, and you can look in one direction, you see tigers and elephants, and then you look in the other way, you see marsupials. What he discovered is that there's a line sort of there, which we now know as Wallace's line, that tends to separate the Asian biodiversity fauna and the Australian. This is a deep water barrier, and it's fairly effective for mammals because mammals don't cross water easily. And it's much less so for reptiles because they get and it is less so for birds, but still quite a bit for birds. So there's this barrier that has separated these two major biotas, and Wallace discovered it. And Wallace is really the father of biogeography and has made his major contribution there. He also got the idea for natural selection, and in a bout of malaria mailed this manuscript to Darwin and said, "What do you think of this?" And Darwin about had a heart attack because there he was, natural selection, and Darwin had been dithering for a long, long time. And his wife was very, very religious. And he was really not wanting to trouble her or bother, and he was very much in love with her. And Emma Wedgwood, so he married into Wedgwood. And as an aside, she was his first cousin. they had some inbreeding problems with kids. Which it's odd that who should get that would be Darwin, but nobody. And what happened then was that Darwin thought it was over, but everybody knew he'd been working on it, and so they arranged for the papers to be read jointly at the Royal Society. And then that got Darwin off his duff, and he wrote madly. Who knows how long he would have dithered if Wallace hadn't come along? We really don't know. And I'm glad we didn't find that out, because who knows, Darwin would have dithered and dithered and dithered, and his hand was forced. So Wallace, but what we see there is that there have been barriers and water barriers, and mammals do not easily cross water barriers, terrestrial mammals. They don't last long out there. Lizards can waft on islands and stuff like that. So it's historical reasons. The monkeys got as far as Sulawesi, but they didn't cross. And it's probably just they never made it. I think that's what it is. And that's given us birds of paradise, because they wouldn't have been there if monkeys had made it.
Vladimir Nabokov, the author, was fascinated. He was an amateur lepidopterist and fascinated with butterflies. I remember a comment. One thing that fascinated him was that he saw at least some species that had an excess of beauty for that served no practical purpose, in his view.
Yeah.
And I was always a little skeptical about that.
Yeah.
Now, is that true that they had a surplus of beauty, or was there some evolutionary reason?
Well, beauty is much misunderstood. And some of you hear, beauty is in the mind of the beholder. Well, that's only partly right. Beauty is in the mind of the adapted beholder. Because what's beautiful is very context dependent. I mean, there's no abstract thing that people have tried to find something abstract. This is what's universally beautiful. Well, it isn't. I had a wonderful little book that I used to read to one of my grandsons, and it was called Alaska's Three Bears. And these three, the black bear and the grizzly bear and the polar bear, are walking along together, and they come to this forest with blueberry bushes, and the black bear says, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is exactly wonderful. This is beautiful." The other two bears are like, "Ah." They walk on. And then they come to a place where the streams are full of salmon. And the brown bear says, "Wow, this really looks great, and I'm going to get off there." Polar bear says, "It doesn't look very good at all." And then he goes on, and finally we get the seals on the ice, and the polar bear, "This is it." And it's a wonderful little story, but it says, beauty depends on what the life of the organism. There's and all these efforts to find a universal standard of beauty fail because there ain't no such thing. And so, is there an excess? We got to look at the life of the thing, and it may be that these are things where something in the competition or something we don't understand yet, but the whole idea that there's an excess of beauty doesn't make any evolutionary sense to me. Now have I got have I given you an answer that makes? Yeah, okay. Beauty is really badly misunderstood, because people think there's some universal they keep going for, and there ain't no such thing. Yeah.
Do there are these sort of extreme examples like the bowerbirds, and there's a lot in birds of things, the peacock's feathers and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that push pretty extreme, and the whole what you said was that these are markers of good genes. How much do we know about whether that's actually true? That a big peacock feather really does mean that they have good genes?
Unfortunately, the answer is we don't know very much, and we think, but we can see that a peacock is bearing an enormous burden. That's and it's hard for them to fly, you know, and you look at that, and to hold that, and to bear that, and stand up. That's enormously expensive, really enormously expensive. And what could drive that is that wins him matings, and so that the females judge that his ability to carry all that and do all of that. He couldn't, I'm speaking anthropomorphically, but you get that he couldn't do all that if he weren't pretty great, you know. And so it can drive these things, and where it drives it, and the peacock and the peahen is another case where the males have nothing to do with raising the baby. She's getting genes only from him, and she's going to do it all by herself. And so where it's only genes that are being selected for, that can drive it pretty far, because the males are forced by the females. And it's interesting, Darwin also produced a book on sexual selection, and it was very badly received. Nobody liked it. And I think one of the main reasons people didn't like it, and it was not stated that way, is that it's choosy females that are running it, okay? Females are running it and running this whole thing, and Victorian England didn't like that idea at all. So I think that's probably the main reason that his theory of sexual selection had such rough sledding, that it elevated females are making the choices and females are running it.
Wasn't the guy? I got it. Gould at Harvard, I forget his first name, who talked about how selection can make you build certain complicated things that you win the fight for, but then they become ultimately unhelpful. I mean, they don't work very well. Too many, the horns get too big or the feathers get too large.
Well,
am I wrong about the? I forget his first name. Gould.
Stephen Jay Gould. But again, what drives something like the peacock way out there so far is that there's got to be low predation for it to go that far, because if they're paid a big price, it won't be driven that far. So there's always, what's the price paid for being that big or thing? And again, they're in an environment where nothing much can get at them, and so we know that when all that displaying and stuff like that can be very costly, and how far it can go depends on what's the price paid by the animals that do it. So I think there's counter selection, and where it can be driven far is where it's only genes that's being involved, and the predation risk is not that high from the males that are doing it. And I've tried to indicate New Guinea is one place where that is emphatically true, but that's not the only place. Does that do I answer your question? Okay.
Go for it.
A number of human-type species have gone extinct, like the Heidelbergians and the Denisovans and the Florences. What accounts for them going extinct?
Well, the fate of species is to go extinct. Okay. 99% of all species that have ever lived have gone extinct. The normal lifespan of mammalian species is 4 or 5 million years or so. So extinction is a part of the process, and there's all sorts of reasons why that happens. Now, with respect to us, what has happened is that there were a number of ancient relatives or other lineage, and it ends up we're the only one. All right, we got rid of, and that's pretty much evidence that It wasn't just competition for resources. We got very good at, we became world's most effective predator ever. And we are good at killing things far away. And we've ended up that we can kill something 1,000 miles away by pressing a button now. We're so good at it. But we became the most effective predator, and there's fairly good evidence that the demise of some of these others were not simply that we outcompeted them, but which we may have done as well, but that we also preyed upon them. So the details we don't know. We know almost nothing about the Denisovans. We've got a few jaws, something like that, and we know something about their genes from that, because one of the wonderful things about the study of evolution now is the rise of to be able to use ancient DNA, and Svante Pavo got the Nobel Prize for that. Not too long ago, and so there's a incredible DNA tends to degrade with time, but we figured out, and particularly up when it's in the ice, where it doesn't go. But people have figured out a way to taste this out, and what we're finding out now is an awful lot of what can go on, and we can get a lot of this because we can, in fact, now read ancient DNA, and that's one of the most exciting things in evolutionary biology right now. So I don't know if we know exactly what happened to the Denisovans. I don't think we do, because we know hardly anything about them, but we know some ideas where they were and where the Neanderthals were. And we know that the Neanderthals lasted way until modern times in southern Spain, and that they also, they were pretty clever. They had religious stuff and all this stuff. So but what Neanderthals couldn't do is they couldn't kill things at a distance. They clubbed. They had to get in, and we got good. And in fact, one way of looking at human history is the ability of ours to kill something else at ever increasing distances. We're really good at it, unfortunately.
I have a question about, I'm thinking of mammals, but it could be any family. What is learned behavior and what is inherited? I'm thinking of possums, playing possum, and there must be other kinds of patterns that people have saved their lives by. I mean,
Yeah, well,
critters have.
this is a very complicated subject, and we spend a lot of time, is it instinctive or it's learned? And that turns out not to be a very productive way to look at it, because you can't learn anything unless you've got the genes to support the learning. We probably have more genes involved with learning than any other organism by far. Because watch a 3-year-old learning a language. Ever seen that? It's all in there. They know. Where do they make the mistake? The irregular verbs. They figure that out right away. And you watch it. There's no way that a 3-year-old can be learning language like that without the support of hundreds of genes to do it. So the real question is, what are the relative roles of genes in experience? And they vary. The fact that we're talking English, I can talk and you can understand English, is entirely cultural. The fact that we can do it and you can understand what I'm saying is almost entirely genetic. So it varies, and the real thing is to find out how is the different ability to. Let me give another example that you've with birds. If a common trick or way of experimenting is to have a perch and you have a string with a nice morsel that the bird would want to eat hanging down from this, and the only way you can get that is to you pick up the string with the bill, hold it with the feet, and do this several times, and you've got it. Okay, so you give that to a crow, gets it right away. Give it to a chickadee, gets it right away. Give it to a house finch, looked at it and doesn't have a clue. Now, is the house finch stupid? No. If you look at the chickadees and crows, commonly use holding things in the feet and integrating the use of feet. And So they've got the machinery to do that. The finches don't do that. But I watched the chickadees getting the sunflower seeds and going up, opening it up, and the finches within a fraction of the time has got it husked using its bill. So it's not that the finches are stupid; they just don't have the evolved machinery to deal with the problem. So it's much more interesting to think about. We always want to know, is it instinctive or it's learned? The real question is, how do these two things interact? And what sort of genetic substratum is necessary to support the kind of learning we see? And human language learning is a stunning example. We got more genes involved in learning than anybody else.
Let me, so we may have 51% of people who now believe in evolution, but we seem also to have just chosen our first creationist Speaker of the House of Representatives. How do you persuade people that evolution is certain? And let me push it a little further. How certain is it? For example, you've told us about the importance of rarity. Is the certainty of rarity as certain as is the theory of evolution in general? Or is that an hypothesis?
Well, the problem with evolution is it's hard to demonstrate. I mean, it is acting, but if you haven't read it, Wiener's book, The Beak of the Finch, is something I recommend everybody. This is where we now know and can see evolution in action and can measure it. And so, but it took a lot of work to figure that out. And it's not easy to demonstrate all of this. And so, but stuff that how do I explain it? Well, yeah, I mean, but the idea of natural selection is really pretty subtle. And it's DNA copying errors, okay? And I've seen religious people argue that's what it is, and they correctly say so. Is that the kind of world you want to live in? And it looks pretty strange and not very comforting, rather than there's somebody in charge. Because evolution says there's nobody in charge. There's nobody looking after. This is what happens. There's no appealing. If you assume there's some entity up there that you can appeal to, then you can cut deals. You can get control. And evolutionary biology says there ain't anybody you can appeal to. There's no way you can get control. So it's really disturbing, and a lot of people want to have, they'd like somebody in charge. It gives you some comfort, and also the comfort is that you can cut deals. And a lot of religious stuff is based on cutting deals. Prayer and various other things are forms of cutting deals. If there's somebody in charge, you have a chance to deal with them. Natural selection, no deals, absolutely none. And so it's, I understand this sort of thing, although this whole thing now is part of the anti-science of everything. It's, we've left the age of science and the age of anything goes, and that's really hard. If we could agree on a problem, then we can disagree on the way to get a solution. But if we don't agree on the problem, there's no way you can go, and that's where we've gone now. And it's rather scary. It's rather scary. But I get why evolution is hard and not too comforting. Go ahead. No deals.
You said we had an amazing number of genes for the learning, Would you say the same thing about mimicry? Because I think a lot of, you mentioned children learning languages. I think a lot of it is mimicry.
Well, mimicry in general is something where I think genes are involved. We know that for birds, for example, one of the things that females evaluate is how many different kind of songs a male can sing, the richness of his repertory. And we know from experiments with some birds that being able to sing more variety of songs and being able to sing a bigger variety of song takes more neural stuff. It's harder. But if you can mimic, boy, you got a whole. So probably mimicry may evolve as a part of enhancing the appeal of being able to engage in more complicated stuff. And so that may be one of the reasons that mimicry is so favored. Because it's hard to see some of the birds that mimic everything. You can't think of any other benefit they're getting out of it, but it may be sexual selection, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like to think that I argue from the or think from the standpoint that we live in a relational universe. The most important relationship for us is personal relationships. And I think you could move from that, in my mind, to the fact that the universe is personal. If you trace that, if you use that kind of language instead of a God, you don't get into all this fundamentalist crap, which I rejected, and so did my father as a pastor. He never believed all that stuff either. And I hit the secular humanists are always talking about arguing against a religion which I never had anything to do with and really discussed with. But anyway, that's my point. A relational universe. If you want to talk about God, talk about relationships.
Well, the evolution of complicated societies like primates, which are the involves an enormous number of relationships and subtle and we all know about the structure of human societies and relationships. It is very, very complicated and involves all this. Where I don't follow you is I don't think that has anything to do with what's going on in the universe. I see no connection between that and I'm happy that we have it. I think the universe is totally amoral and has nothing like that. But I get your point. I get your point. I just don't follow you from the connection.
Peter, one final
question. I think what's important is to wrap our minds around how difficult it is to believe evolution. I mean, it is totally crazy notion that I could be an organism with just prone to sunburn, maybe a little sensitive around here, and then I develop an eye. I mean, it is just very hard to get the mind around it. I taught at MIT for 9 years, and I used to get students to try and, they were so smart, but to try and explain why the sun doesn't rise in the east. That we're spinning hundreds of miles an hour with our feet on a spinning thing, and the sun stays still, and we're just moving towards it. It's just very hard to believe. I mean, what science tells us is it's so crazy. So anyway, my point is just to do justice to how hard some of the truths of sciences are. They're so crazy. I see the sun rising and set, but the sun doesn't do that. I see color out there. I see color and all of this stuff. It's all up here. There's no color out there. Strawberries aren't red because they got a lot of red molecules. None of this. So all of this is really hard to understand. It's really subtle. And so I get why a lot of people have trouble with it, but all I can say is I think that's the way it is. And give it a try, okay?
I think what Gordon has been able to illustrate to us in a variety of lectures, one piece at a time, is that all this evolution is happening through a series of random processes, and here we are. For me, that's wondrous.
Yeah.
Beyond all else.
Oh, I think the view of the world I have is very, very wondrous and rich.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a lot richer than there's somebody pulling
Yeah.
strings.
Yeah.
But that's a matter of taste. But, you know, some people would rather have somebody pulling strings. But all I can say is this is how the world seems to me. And it's very hard to grasp, and it's counterintuitive. And damn it, you got a pink shirt, don't you? But you don't. You know, it's all up here. And it's counterintuitive to grasp all of this. And science is hard. Grasping science is hard. All I can say, all I've been trying to do in my talks is, it's really worth a try.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Wonderful.